because she's in Melbourne and it's 6 in the morning there. So everybody, big ups for Sarah, big coffee for Sarah, who had to get up 5:30 and so she could get ready for this thing. So that's amazing. Thank you. And Sarah is one of the deepest thinkers about building thoughtful sustainability into creative life that I know. And so that's also the main reason that I'm really excited that she's here today. And she's a wonderful cartoonist and graphic recorder. So Sarah, thank you for being here today with us. Yes, have that coffee.
Yes, I am mainlining coffee right now. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on here, Jessica. I've been a huge fan of yours for years, and I think what you do is so helpful and important, and it's, you know, right up my alley, because I'm always trying to figure out how can I make doing this more enjoyable and perhaps easier and sustainable. And I think it's really hard, and it's different for each person, you know. So exciting to chat about real life and creativity. Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely is hard and it is different. And I think that's one of the things I most wanted to talk to you about because you've been, you know, I know that you've really gone through a process of testing, you know, very open, with open eyes, you know, and really testing like what's going to work for you and thinking about, is this going to happen or is this not going to happen? Does this fit with my priorities? Does this fit with what I want out of my life? And then tacking and making changes. So that's been really interesting to watch that happen and to hear you talk about it. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. But first, because I know a lot of people who are here, and hello everybody who's here live, I know a lot of people who are here are meeting you for the first time. So I'd really like to find out, first of all, what do you do? And a little bit about what your sort of typical week looks like. I'm not going to say day because I'm sure it changes a lot day to day, but like over a period of time.
Yeah. So what do I do? As I think you said in one of your posts, I'm like this and this and this and this and this. And so I guess I would, if I was introducing myself to someone at a party, I would just say I'm an artist and a writer. Again, a lot. And then, you know, if people want to know more, then I'd kind of dig in. I tend to try and talk to people where they're at in ways that they might understand. So, for example, I would also sometimes call myself a cartoonist, but unfortunately, at least in Australia, that has a lot of sort of baggage around it. Like we don't have, I was about to say something that's completely wrong. We have an amazing comics culture, but for people outside comics, they don't really know what it is. So yeah, and even saying that I'm a graphic recorder, which is kind of live performative drawing, again, most people don't know what that is. So, you know, I go with artist and writer and kind of go from there. But yeah, pictures, words together is my jam. You know, and I also animate. So things that are kind of narrative, like I'm very flexible with what I do. You know, I don't have a really specific one thing that I do. I do many things, you know, and like as a kid, I always knew I wanted to be an artist. Actually, before that, I wanted to be a mermaid, and I didn't realize that that wasn't a thing. But actually, it is a thing. There are professional mermaids. So, you know, that could still be on the cards for me. Yeah, you know, I always knew I wanted to be an artist. And part of that was I realized that it was a world where you had freedom, where you don't have to be as boxed in as other things. Like you can be celebratorily weird, you know, and not get away with it, but it's just, you know, it is a context that you can work with that gives you a bit of freedom there. Sorry, I'm a bit rambly. It is 6 a.m. here.
Anyway. We're going to give you a lot of leeway and credit for just being able to put sentences together. So don't worry about it. Just keep rolling. It's going to be fine.
All right, good. All right, good.
Yeah. So meanwhile, let's keep going here. So yeah, artists, words, pictures. I mean, I totally get it. Like, I think that saying you're a cartoonist in this country is a little bit easier, but still people, you know, they want to call me a graphic novelist. They want to call me, you know, whatever else. And of course I've done stuff like you have that doesn't involve a lot of pictures, and I do speaking and I do teaching and whatever else. So that kind of multi-passionate life where you just have all these different things. I think one of the things I encounter a lot, and I'm sure, I think you've done this, you know, sort of gone through this a little bit, is I encounter a lot of people who struggle with this idea of being multi-passionate, having lots of things they want to do, and they don't really know how to, like how to sort that out. And
Ah,
my feeling is that you kind of don't have to. It's more you do the activity and whatever you people want to call it. I mean, it's a little bit complicated, but whatever.
mm.
You know, as long as you figure out the thing you want to do in the moment, you know, you can switch and do all those things.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And like, I'm doing an anthropology course at the moment, and we had a lecture the other week that was about how, where the lecturer said something that really stuck with me, which was that identity is utility. And what he meant by that is that we are all incredibly complex and multifaceted, and your identity presents in different contexts and different ways. And so if you're, you know, multi-potentialite, you have this whole kind of toolkit of things you can do and skills you can plug into that will kind of play out in different spaces. So for example, you might spend 5 years being primarily a writer because you get some opportunities to do that. And then your priorities and the context changes, and then you go and you do, you know, you're a professional cellist. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and to me, that's a really inclusive and exciting way to think about not having to pigeonhole yourself, because like, and there's more and more books coming out now about how, you know, having range as a person is actually really powerful and makes you anti-fragile. You know, it makes you flexible. It makes you, you know, come up with creative solutions, you know, and mix things in from different industries together to, you know, to innovate, things like that. And that's really exciting, you know.
Oh, I agree
Um,
with that, and I mean, I definitely think that that's kind of the direction. I like that it's sort of, I don't know. I mean, I've moved back and forth from doing all the kinds of different things myself, and they there's a way in which I feel like we're encouraged to pin ourselves down into one definition, but knowing that you don't really have to means you can recover kind of all sorts of, you know, skill sets and ideas and idea generation that come out of different directions and out of different, you know, fields that you might be involved in. So that, you know, a lot of project management stuff that I've learned comes out of, you know, helping to be on the editorial team of books. And it's not writing and it's not creating, right? But it's like this, there are things that fit together, and together they make a more, like you said, anti-fragile kind of life, you know, more sustainable and more resilient kind of life, where you have all these different places you can go for information and ideas and so on.
Yeah, and it gives you different frameworks and methodologies for playing, basically. So, for example, when you, another thing you said before is like, how do you test? How do you work through what you want to do and what you don't want to do? And I actually find that kind of taking a quasi-scientific methodology is helpful, which is like, what theories about myself and my creativity am I willing to test? And, you know, am I willing to fail? And that's been my process, is that if I have an appetite or interest in trying something, I will try it. You know, I'll take a calculated risk, you know, and see if it works. Because in my experience, you know, I'll have a fantasy of like, oh, it'd be so awesome to run all these workshops and do this thing. And it's only when I test it and actually run them that I go, oh, I don't have the capacity to work with people every day for 8 hours running workshops. Like, I just burn out. And that's not something I would have known until I tested it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely know what you mean. And I am trying to figure out a tech thing here. So give me 1 second.
Yeah, you just
And
disappeared from the screen.
yeah, we're having trouble with our back end here. So
Oh,
the
while you're fixing something, I'll just respond to a comment I saw here. Someone said, love your mushroom t-shirt, want one. This design is from the amazing artist, cartoonist Tara Booth, who's an American artist, and this is one of her mushroom tops. She has many other prints. So that's Tara Booth. So check her out. She's great.
very nice. Yeah, so I'm not able to turn this back on right now. Let me see if I can get
Oh,
rid of this thing and if that will help. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to be
Yeah.
just letting you know that that's happening on the background. Can you tell us, how do you make a living right now? Like, what's going
So,
on with you in terms of making a living?
um, how do I make a living right now? Oh, you also asked me what's my day like, which I didn't answer.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sort of related. Yep.
Yeah. So at the moment, I am making a living mainly from graphic recording. Like that's my biggest chunk of income. Um, I'm also working on a grant for my graphic novel. So I've applied for grants to get time to work on my graphic novel because that's a key tension in my life is, doing my client facing work and then doing my own creative work are always in tension. Most artists have this going on. And so I really like utilizing grants to get time and space. So currently, how that looks in my week, in my days are actually more regular at the moment than usual. So I split my day based on energy levels. So I get up early and I work on my graphic novel for 4 hours a day. And I do that very routinely, mainly using the power of coffee. And then and then after 12, I will switch into client mode where I have meetings or doing graphic recording or whatever. And then in the afternoon, I exercise. Again, I found it sounds a bit boring, but I found exercise is absolutely integral to my creative process and brain health and physical health. So, I try to keep a routine as much as possible. That said, when I get bookings for events, my days completely change. And, I'm working all weekend this weekend, doing workshops. So, you know, um, it's all very flexible and changeable. But, as much as possible, I try to keep my kind of routine and, prioritize writing my book first up in the day. So that's kind of the shape of things and also the money side. I also have been experimenting with sort of passive income, alternative income streams with, stickers, t-shirts, doing like little learning online training courses, things like that. And, so I always try and have a play around with, what's helpful for people and also what can help, build my income. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember hearing you talk about your path to where you are now, that you, I think as an undergrad, were in sculpture. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to
So,
make kinetic sculptures, so using old car parts and reconfiguring them to make like giant drawing machines. So I was
mhm.
basically outsourcing my drawing to robots.
How different can you possibly be when it comes to, you know,
Yeah, I feel like it's the same, but just going about it in a very complex way. Whereas now I just do the drawing myself. Um, anyway. Oh, are you still there? Should I say hello? I'm thinking of maybe answering some of the questions in the time, but maybe I don't. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everybody. Oh, so there's a comment here. Where do you find grant sources? Um, oh, so I'm in Australia, so our grant process is a bit different. Hmm. I'm just talking to participants. Oh, you can still hear me. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just here typing because I thought the whole thing had, emptied out. So I can't hear you at all, Jessica. I can read the comments. So maybe while we're sorting out the tech stuff, I can, respond to comments. Jessica, I'll let you know as soon as I can hear you again. But hello, all attendees. If you want to ask some questions or have any comments, please type them in the chat area. Okay, my sound is good, amazing, love it. So what's this? Love your pages on the wall. Yeah, so these are just some of my comics. So I work digitally on my iPad here. So I use a program that lots of people use called Procreate. Hold on. Yeah, so it's a bit hard to see, but yeah, I use this program called Procreate, and I work on the iPad, which I love. But when it comes to making comics, the challenge for me is because all the work is like jammed in my iPad, I feel like I can't see it. So I actually do a really dorky, old-fashioned thing and print out my comics on the wall so that I can, see them and they're tangible. So that's what all these are. Do I do my graphic recording in Procreate too? Yes, I do. Procreate is great. It's actually made by an Australian company in Tasmania, which is a tiny little island off our main. And it's made by two guys. It's one of the best products I've seen. It's really comparable with Photoshop as a drawing tool. And one of my favorite things about Procreate is that you can get a time-lapse video. So these are notes that I was taking last night for the anthropology course that I'm studying. And I'm sorry that the video is not very good, but you can see that it plays back what I've drawn. Oh yeah, you really can't see it. Oh, there we go. And so that's this really great feature that Procreate has. You can also do animation. Yeah, Matt, how good is Procreate? And it's a one-off purchase, so you don't have to pay exorbitant prices monthly, which I love. Which, when it comes to like business and money stuff, I'm always of the mind of like, if you can save money, that's great because you don't need to earn as much. What if you made mistakes in your graphic recording video? Again, working digitally is fantastic because you can just erase it. And because the time lapse happens so fast, if you make a mistake, you can't really tell. And as someone who's dyslexic, I make very weird spelling mistakes all the time. And so digital has been a game changer for me because I used to work on paper. So I'd go and do live graphic recording at a big event, working on paper, and I'd make spelling mistakes. So I had to use, stickers, like, cut a sticker over and put it over to manage that. So it got a bit messy. Is Procreate available for Android? No. Oh, that's sad. They should work on that. So I'm going to go back and see if there's any more comments and questions. There's a question of what is graphic recording. So graphic recording is one name. There's many names for it. And I saw in the media that Jessica sent out that it's a relatively new field. It's been around since the 70s, and like you could say that, visual storytelling and collaborative map making is as old as the hills. So, I don't know if you can say it's new. But yeah, you could call it graphic recording. You can call it graphic facilitation, which technically it is a type of facilitation. So graphic facilitation is the most technically accurate term. But if you say graphic facilitation to most people, they don't know what that is. How are you facilitating? It's also called sketch notes, live illustration, sketchnoting. So there's a few different terms there. But I like graphic recording because it helps people understand that it's more of a passive role. Like, you're not facilitating a room of people, you are facilitating and recording the content. But even then, you're not a stenographer, you're not trying to get everything, you're just capturing kind of the key, salient, memorable highlights, key points, things like that. Now, more questions here. It's amazing that you have some dyslexia and did graphic recording. Yeah, it was a challenge for a long time. I felt very, very ashamed, of saying to clients that I have dyslexia, because I was worried they'd go, oh, we don't want to hire you if you've got dyslexia. But I think that through my own sort of evolution of understanding ableism and disability, I've been able to advocate more for, inclusive ways of working, where I'll just be very upfront saying I'm dyslexic, and that when I am working with you, if you can check for spelling mistakes and errors and just let me know, then we'll, work together. And I've actually found that creates more kind of intimacy and collaboration with the client and also with participants, because I'll say to them, hey, if you see a mistake, let me know. So they'll come and talk to me, and it creates more of an interface and a dialogue. Next one, Sarah, how did you find your first graphic recorder clients? So I got into graphic recording about 10 years ago, and it was actually through my partner, who said, hey, you take really amazing visual notes. And I've always taken visual notes because I'm neurodivergent, and I find it very hard to process, linear information. And by doing graphic recording or visual notes, I'm able to kind of spatially represent information. So it's just a natural kind of language to me. So my partner saw this, and he was working for an IT firm at the time. And he said, hey, would you be up for doing this in a design meeting? And, at the time I was driving market trucks and doing vegetable deliveries, and it was a fun job. It didn't pay very well. And so I said, yeah, I'll come and give that a whirl. So, jumped right in to tech land and, took visual notes and barely knew what they were talking about. But the feedback that I got from that session was, oh, this is so useful, and this really helps to visualize what we're talking about and communicate what we're talking about. So that was my first experience. And just from there, and the value of the work, demonstrating itself, is how, one thing led to another, to another, to another. Yeah. I thought I'd just check in, Jessica, with what you would like to do. If you're still there. In the meantime, shall we? Oh, this is my cat, Prince. He's just waking up. Yeah, if you have more questions about graphic recording and comics, Oh, Jessica's grabbing a laptop. Great. But yeah, any more questions? Ask a question. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, I'm an anti-pigeonholes, multi-passionate person who's always been told, don't be a jack of all trades, no one will take you seriously. Where is the fine line between having a bash at something and being an amateur or being a professional, an expert? Gosh, what a question. Thank you. Thank you, Leonie. So, I feel like part of it is getting really real with yourself about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Sometimes I think that being multi-passionate and kind of flitting from one thing to another, to another, to another, to another can be a way of not investing in anything. And questioning your motivations and questioning what you're doing and kind of trying to get real about that can help you figure out, like, is there something I'm avoiding by flitting between stuff? Or am I kind of working towards something deeper that's kind of an integrated, broader skill set? Oh, hello, Jessica, you're back.
I am back. Can you hear me?
Hey. Oh, I've never been.
I'm hearing myself twice. Are you echoing, or is it just me?
It's just you.
Okay, I can handle
Would
it.
you like me to do anything with my audio?
No, I think it's just because I have two computers running, and I'm just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for handling that.
No worries.
That's amazing. I was listening, so
thank you.
Able to kind of follow along. So let me get back a little bit to where I was before, which you've touched on a little bit on your own. But I wanted to talk about the way that you took a path from your undergrad, and then you had a car accident that caused you to really reassess how you wanted to be working. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So when people say, how did you get to where you are? There's kind of what you intended, and then there's like life crashing into your intention. So I finished art school as a sculptor, as I mentioned. I was doing kinetic sculpture. I was going to go and work in Sydney with a kind of very famous theatre and dance institution called Carriage Works. And I was actually going to work as a welder, doing welding for theatre and prop stuff. But then as I was moving to Sydney, I had a really bad car accident. And the biggest challenge with that was, firstly, I lost my short-term memory. And it took me about 1.5 years to reestablish that. But also I couldn't walk for about 6 months. So I was in bed, and I'd always, not prided, I'd always taken my physical ability absolutely for granted. And it was that moment, so it was 2009, I think, 2009. And I just had this kind of rude shock of not knowing if I would regain mobility. Would I ever be able to work as a sculptor? Because before I was standing, 10 hours a day and just moving around. And so, and I was in my early 20s, and it was a real shock. And I had a lot of trauma and sadness from that experience. And also it led to a big relationship breakup. So it was a very big crack in my life, so to speak. And I felt really sorry for myself for quite a while, to be honest. And then I realized, look, this is what's happening now. I don't know what will happen in the future. What can I do from bed? I wanted to make art. I wanted to kind of process how I was feeling. And so I, started writing more. I started playing around with animations and doing comics, mainly as graphic medicine, to be honest, which was just trying to make sense of my sadness and the trauma of the experience. And interestingly, that's also when I got onto social media, because, I experienced what a lot of disabled people experience, which is social isolation, because I couldn't go out anywhere. And through social media and through making art and sharing my art, I realized that, there was this way of connecting online with ideas, with people, with voices. And it was a bit of a revelation, actually. I really fell in love with social media and what it can offer you when you're isolated and vulnerable. Yeah.
Right. Which led to, it's like a couple of different things I want to touch on here, but like the one that what I thought was interesting is when I heard this interview with you on Starving Artist, which is from several years ago, and then your Growing Up Disabled in Australia book came out later, it was like several years later. And you kind of told the story of becoming graphic recorder and doing comics and stuff in two different ways. Like, one is you were stuck in bed and you realized that this was a way, like you were trying to retrain your brain because you couldn't remember things, and so you're using post-its and stuff like that, which I thought was really interesting, and I'd love to hear a little bit about that. But then, you know, on the other end, you're like, well, I'm also neurodiverse, and so I've also had this kind of necessity to use doodling and, you know, these other ways of handling information, all of which feed into visual storytelling of various kinds. And like, how do you see those things coming together? And then the second piece of that is the social media piece, which I want to get back to, but let's start there.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing to say is that I actually didn't get diagnosed as neurodiverse. Well, you don't get diagnosed as neurodiverse. Neurodiversity is a kind of big way of saying, you know, multiple intersections of neurodivergence. And so that, you know, autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, various things in there. And so when I was relying on visual tools in the rehabilitation from my car accident, I didn't know that I was neurodiverse. So the comic that I have in this book, Growing Up Disabled in Australia, which is an anthology that was just released, which is, you know, really big in Australia. It's the first book that's ever been published about, you know, collective stories of disability. That was very much about the experience of getting diagnosed in your mid-30s, you know, and looking at the thread that has been in my life and making sense of things. Again, it's very much graphic medicine. So to me, that stuff is all kind of messily entangled, and, you know, through narratives you create, you know, a story that's like true, but it's like way oversimplified. So yeah, so that the story in that book was very much sort of specifically looking at neurodiversity and diagnosis as an adult, and not, you know, talking about the car accident, because that's a whole other thing. Yeah.
Right. But it seems like probably that your lifetime experience of dealing with the variety of neurodiversity that you have led to the tools that you developed and used to get better from your car accident. You know, they're connected, right? And I think it's really interesting because I work with, in the Creative Focus workshop, I work with a lot of people who are neurodiverse in various ways. You know, some of it is, as somebody's saying here, Shelley is talking about an acquired brain injury. So there's that kind of thing, but there's also a lot of ADD people, ADHD, some autism, some people with different, you know, just diversity, like just different ways of dealing with things. And I mean, it's a spectrum, right? Like it's a spectrum. It's not just a linear spectrum. It's like a 3D, 4D spectrum. And we all are diverse in various ways. Like, what is diverse from what? Like, we all have our own little ways. And so part of that, I think the story that's so interesting to me is that you were like, looked at this, you looked back and realized this neurodiversity had shaped your life in some ways, but you leveraged it. Like, you turned it into a power. You know, you took this thing and you said, okay, I could look at this as a disability, or I can look at it as kind of a superpower. And maybe that's too glib, works for my social media posts, but maybe not in reality. But like, to a certain extent, I feel like that there's something to that.
Yeah. So just as a little aside, so the context that this book speaks into is talking about disability and using the word disability, but looking at disability not as a deficit model, but more that disability is a natural and inevitable and completely normal manifestation in human societies. And what creates the disability is not the disability itself, but the social context. So there's a thing called the social model of disability. And that's partly why I am talking more and being more of an advocate now, is that with learning disabilities and like sensory autism spectrum sensitivities, the challenge that I have had is this constant feeling of there's something really wrong. Why can't I do this? There's something wrong with me. And feeling a huge amount of shame. And part of that is from feedback from people saying, oh, you're so stupid, or like, why don't you get this? Or, you know, sort of just mean comments like that. But then realizing my personal way of reclaiming that is going, okay, I find this thing hard. What are the workarounds that I can do. So for example, when I had short-term memory loss, it was very painful. I would leave the room and not know what I was doing. And then I went, okay, what skills, what tools do I have? Post-it notes, so I wrote lists, and I felt like an absolute dork. And, my housemates made fun of me, which was offensive. But I was like, there was something powerful knowing that I could help myself with the tools that I had available. And, I could use those as, rocks to climb out of where I was. And, but yeah, I just feel like celebrating disability and celebrating diversity is very important. And it creates more permission and space for other people to, talk about where they're at, what's going on, and figure out ways to make their life better, and how to support each other. And so, for example, I do Olympic weightlifting, and I'm also someone with dyscalculia. And, often the people that I'm weightlifting with, I'll put the weights on wrong, and they'll be like, oh, Sarah, you're lifting 58 kilos. Whoa. And I'll be like, oh, I thought it was 48, because I just can't add up really simple numbers. And again, it's been an education process with that community of being like, I'm not a total idiot. I just actually have a problem with very simple calculations, and I can't use an analog digital watch. I have to use a watch that's got a circle with the segments, because that's the only thing that my brain can understand. And, rather than being ashamed of that, just being like, okay, what works for me? What doesn't work? And how do I articulate that to other people in a way that's empowering for me, not a deficit?
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Yeah, really good. Yeah, and that's exactly what I was getting at, where I feel like it has been a font of invention for you, even as it's been painful. And I think that's true for a lot of creative people in the various ways that we invent to make our lives work. Managing the shame that comes along with not going, the sort of standard route. Meanwhile, figuring out something, like making something work. And it's really like necessity is the mother of invention, like in action, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I just noticed someone's comment about, some people complain and some people just get on with it. And it's like, again, everyone's experience is completely, like, disability is a huge spectrum. The challenges that people face are, like, I have a huge amount of privilege, that makes my disability easier, right? So I don't want to, it's a complex thing to talk about and unpack. And I don't think that there's any one approach or any one way that people should or shouldn't do anything. So I just wanted to say that, like, it is really complex, and it, intersections of class, race, gender, where you live, all these things, right? As with everything. So yeah.
Yes, and I think people are allowed to feel bad, about, it's like there's also this sense of, like, toe the line, like, buckle down, do the thing, you can do this, blah blah blah. It was like, yes, but you're also allowed to be angry, you're also allowed to be upset about this. And I think that when people try to kind of not allow that, it's a real problem.
Yeah. So, resilience is important, but it's also, important to acknowledge that, like, to have resilience requires certain conditions and, characteristics of personality. And, some people are more optimistic, some people are more depressive naturally. And that's another mix in there, and I, personality wise, tend to just, like, I'll get very, like, down about things, but then I have this part of me that gets, like, cranky, and I'm like, all right, screw them, screw this, let's just do it, and that is a personality characteristic of frustration and, like, righteous anger or something that helps me. And I have a lot of energy as well, right?
Yeah.
So
I loved your story, Unexpectedly Thriving, about disability in lockdown, like how, and what I liked about it was the contrast that you set up. So this is a short story. I don't know if it's available online somewhere, but
yes.
You can share the link to that if we can find it later. But there's a sort of before and an after where it's like, the work that you do as, and this is something I was curious about as a graphic recorder, I would think that as somebody with some extra sensitivity would like really trigger that. It'd be really difficult to be in this like really chaotic social environment, paying attention to all these different things. And you say that, you say like, I've had these ways of dealing with this. I've figured out ways of dealing with this. But then during lockdown, you're like, oh gosh, is this better? Oops. Like this kind of feeling of like almost feeling bad that it's better. You know what I mean? Like there's
yeah, that's something that I bring up in the comic, and I have a few interviews with other disabled and deaf artists in there. In Australia, COVID has been difficult. Lockdown has been difficult. Nothing like what's happened in the US, but it's still been generally a really, really full-on hard time for everybody. But for disabled people and also socially isolated people and neurodivergent people, many of us have actually found that working remotely has actually made our lives easier, and things are online. So, instead of not being able to go to a concert, you can attend a concert from home, and deliveries to your house and all these, modifications that disabled people have been advocating for years, suddenly happened. And my experience of that was that, like you said, when I work on an event, because I have sensory processing sensitivities, people moving around, lots of sound, I'm absolutely max out. And so when I would do a graphic recording job, I would need to rest for a day or two afterwards because I would just be totally burnt out. Whereas working virtually, I didn't have that. And I was a bit shocked, and that was just a story of mine, and also, other people who'd had similar experiences that I wanted to share. And I use the analogy of how people are like house plants, and we all have different needs. And, one plant will totally thrive in burning hot sun, and other plants thrive in a steamy bathroom in the dark. And, you can't force or expect certain people to like manage in certain contexts is kind of the point that I was trying to make. And again, it's, about awareness. And even when it comes to things like introvertedness and extrovertedness that aren't necessarily kind of neurological divergencies, some people need people more often than others. And, it's this figuring out what works for you and what doesn't work for you is really important,
Yeah, for sure. And that's actually one of the things I wanted to ask you, because I know you mentioned that you fairly briefly, had a corporate day job and then left, right? So you, after your accident, you're like, I need stability, I need health insurance, I need whatever, got a job, then left the job. Can you talk about like how that played out for you? Because I know that there was a level of conscious decision-making, like this is not going to be good for me. It's not going to function. And here's why, and here's how I can do something differently.
Sorry. After the car accident, because I felt quite vulnerable, I was like, I really need full-time work. I need to get back on my feet. And so I worked as an operations assistant at a medical research institute. It's very famous. And I was working 9 to 5 doing operations there. So, operations of, managing lab materials and processing and like centrifuge calibration, stuff like that. And after about 6 months, I was there for a year, but after about 6 months, I just went, wow, this is going to destroy me. I can't do this. There were also issues with rampant workplace sexual harassment, which I write about in Drawing Power, because I worked in a technician's lab with 12 guys, and I was the only 20-year-old woman, and that wasn't great. But I realized that for the comfort that I got from having a salary, it took away too much of my what's the right word? Joie de vivre. Like it robbed me of my like energy and joy of life. And I just went, oh, I've got to figure out a different way to do this, or this will destroy my creative juice. And so after that job, I did a thing called NEIS, which is the New Enterprise Incentive Scheme, which was run by the government. That was basically a really small grant for a year to try and help you set up a business, and also some really basic business training. So I did that, and I actually grew and sold plants.
That's the plant analogy.
Yeah, so growing fruit, vegetable plants, pot plants is like a hobby. Like I love nature stuff. So I did that for sort of 2 years, and then I hit another wall of, wow, growing plants is very slow, and also I really don't like sitting at markets for 2 days a week just sitting. It was too slow, and also doesn't make very good money. So, then I was like, what else can I do? Oh, I'm good at driving. Oh no, I'll drive trucks. So again, my system has been like, what are my skills? How does that fit into capitalism? What can I leverage? And just trying things.
Have you ended up with any kind of like, because I feel like that you're basically saying like, okay, here's skills that people will pay for, that I don't hate, or at least I don't think I hate, right? Here's things I can turn into something. And then now I'm going to test that. And then I'm like, no, it's a no on this category and this category. Do you have like a rubric? Do you have like an actual checklist of some kind where you're like, yes, this, I mean, you don't need to do that anymore, I guess, because now you're.
Yeah. I really like playing around with different visual planning tools. So, for example, there's a Japanese Venn diagram that's called Ikigai, which is meant to be your kind of life's purpose. And that's got like contribution, passion, income. So these different dimensions. And so I would use that quite a lot of trying to see where the overlap was between skills and getting paid. But I guess the method that I use more now is around impact and time. Because through graphic recording, I've realized that the main thing that you're working with is deep stakeholder management of understanding what problem is there and what value you can bring to help solve a problem for them, which to me is like very values driven. And when you can help solve problems and help people with something, they are willing to pay for it, in my experience. And so with graphic recording, a lot of that is around communication, clarity, and distilling what's being said. And it's actually really hard in an event to get everyone on the same page and understanding what was being said, remembering what was said. And so like the value of that is huge. And also sharing that on social media and having an asset that can be printed as a poster so people can, continually re-engage with something that's very important, or creating transparency around decision making and process, So there's lots of ways where graphic recording is really flexible as a tool that can deliver a lot of value for clients. So yeah, for me, it's like, how much value can I bring to something? And then also, how much time can I buy back? For example, I could work 5 days a week earning $20 an hour, and that'll give me this amount of money. Or I could do something that's very values driven, where I can charge more and buy back more of my time because I only have to work 2 days a week or something. So that's this equation that's like really
it's designing your business model, right? It's designing the way this is going to work for you. And because your mission really is to make time. I mean, I know that you really care about graphic recording, but your mission is to do your stories, to write your work, and to write your books and so on. So tell us a little bit about the book you're working on.
So I'm working, sorry, I've got a bit of a cough. So I'm working on a graphic novel at the moment, which is my debut graphic novel that I've been working on for 5-6 years now. That is a kind of, I guess, a philosophical piece, looking at, how do we make sense of the world today in hyper complexity. And it's 12 essays that intersect looking at, different facets of, the world and life today, and the sort of challenges and unexpected approaches to thinking about things. So it's very much like asking questions and thinking.
It just seems so aligned with what, like, the way you've built your life, that you're constantly questioning, like, is this, you do things, you test, you question, like, is this the right way to go? Is this working for me? How can I tweak and adjust this? One of the things I loved seeing from you a few years ago was your workbook, the Untangle Your Brain and Think on the Page workbook, which I believe you made available for us.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. So we'll put the link in the chat to that. But that was really great because it was like this, I do this stuff, like that's what I teach, right? But then seeing this very different way of coming at it was really, really interesting. And that analytical brain that you apply to this, it's like, I don't see that all the time in comics, but it makes perfect sense for the kind of work that you're doing in comics, but also the kind of work that you're doing, in graphic recording, that you have to like live interpret, basically, sort of live analyze and synthesize stuff people are saying. Because I mean, you could have an entire, day-long conference on a page, essentially, in some cases.
Yeah. And again, graphic recording as a practice is very performative, but it is also very strategic. So because it's not stenography, so stenography is, the person in the courtroom taking every word down. Graphic recording is a broad synthesis. And so when you listen for graphic recorders, you need to like think about context, think about the agenda. And I don't mean the agenda of the day, but it's like, who is saying what and why, and what's going to happen with this asset afterwards. So you're always thinking about, the lens that you're speaking, that you're working from and speaking to. And to me, that's a strategic mindset, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Totally makes sense. All right. So we need to wrap up pretty soon, even though we had that interruption, but thank you again for covering for me. I just feel so cared for. So the thing I wanted to ask you, it's a standard question, but it's one that I always find so interesting, is like, what would you tell a younger version of yourself? What do you wish that you had known at the outset of this? Or is the journey the real mission?
I would just say to myself, keep going, you'll get there, or keep trying, you'll figure out what works for you. Or I would say, the stuff that's not working and the stuff that you think is bullshit, or the stuff that you think is not so great, you might be onto something.
So trust yourself, like trust your instincts. Well,
I actually am I'm a bit cautious with the trust yourself, because we're all masters of self-deception. But I do think that like sometimes we go, this doesn't feel right.
But so how do we trust ourselves then? Like because that's what you're saying. And I think you're right. Like when you have that sense, you're like, no, like you have to learn to trust that. But how do you separate that from the self-deception piece?
Oh, that's complex. And lots of people will say that you can't. But I also believe that intuition is a thing. But I think that to me, intuition and gut feels are yet another input. And so if the decision you're making really matters, I would look at, what's your gut impulse? What did you feel at the beginning? What have you thought after you've thought about it some more? What's influencing you? Look at the big thing and kind of write it out, think about it, talk about it. If it's something that doesn't matter so much, like if you're sitting on a bus and you sit next to someone and you don't feel safe, just move. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so there are times where I feel like trusting your intuition and gut feel can be more spontaneous or not, but also we're all biased. We all have prejudices. We all have, ways that we deceive ourselves. And so I think that, for me, the practice of writing every day and actually talking with myself helps me to see where, how I'm feeling doesn't necessarily line up with what actually happened, and kind of really getting real about that. And I do that with the utmost compassion. I'm not trying to make myself wrong or that I'm stupid. It's more just like self-therapy or something.
Yeah. But it's another data point, right? It's another piece of information that we need to bring into the mix, and maybe it's not trust it's trust but verify, right?
And then again, I think it's a anthropology thing from this guy called Gertz, which is like, if you're looking at other people, and this is applied to self, which is like, look at what they say about themselves, look at what they say they do, but then look at what they actually do. And I think you can do that with yourself. And in order to do that, I feel like you also need to talk to people close to you, because often they will pick you up on your bullshit. And that's really helpful as well. But again, like, you need to have a certain level of self-love or confidence to do that without turning it into, oh, I'm terrible. And, that stuff is not helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I wanted to make a little time for some questions here. And then we will wrap up. But quickly, let's see. I think we covered a bunch of these, talked about your graphic novel. We talked about social media just for a second there. We didn't really get back to it, but you talked about how social media actually became really useful for you. And I think it's a thing that for a lot of creatives, like some people, if they don't feel comfortable with it, they often look at it and think, there's no, I can't do that. Like, that person's different from me. They can do it, but I can't do it. Like, I don't know how to do that. I don't know what to do with it. And Evie asked, and this is an additional piece of it, is did you experience any hate on social media, and how did you deal with that? I think that people fear social media, fear being visible, because that visibility can bring, the randomness of other people.
Yeah. So firstly, I'll say I just enjoy social media. Again, as a neurodivergent person, it gives me a way to be social in a way that doesn't completely burn me out. So there's that. So it's sort of a big part of my life naturally. And I'm really interested in what other people are doing. I'm really interested in ideas and conversations. And, because I guess my work is like, often asking questions. I really enjoy posing questions and then people responding. And with, hate online, it happens and it's hard, and you just have to grow a thicker skin and, also be open to criticism and open to good dialogue. Like, I'm really open to good, robust, difficult dialogue, but only when it's actually generative and useful. If it's sort of punitive and weaponized or whatever, then I'm always very cautious. Some people say, oh, don't listen to any criticism, just do what you want. And I'm like, I don't agree with that. Like, often people will say something that I'd not thought of or not considered, and that was something that I didn't know. And so I'm really grateful for that, But yeah, some people you just have to block because they're just being horrible and being trolls.
Right. And I think that, like, feeling like it's legit to block people, like, it's fine to have boundaries. It's fine to log off and not pay attention. I mean, knowing that it is going to hurt a little bit. I always talk about having kind of a plan. Like, so if somebody says something hurtful, what are you going to do? Like, what's your action plan there in terms of blocking if you need to, but also getting support from people and getting kind of, emotional, reinforcement. But yeah.
The biggest challenge with, online dialoguing is that we all have zero idea about each other's contexts. So we're missing huge amounts of information about why someone said what they said, where they're talking from. Are they just really, really upset at the moment and it's nothing to do with you? So there's all these like gaps there. And so sometimes, you just have to go like, I don't know why this person is saying this, and sometimes you might call a friend and be like, hey, do you know so-and-so? And like, Do you know where they're at? Like, you know, yeah, and sometimes just like logging off.
Yeah.
Getting back to the real world for a while is good.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned in one of your comments that I read over the last week or something was like putting your phone down, putting it away, logging off social media for a while, and just the way it changes your interaction with the world. It's worth knowing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But often it's the opposite problem I find with creatives, where they're just like, it's too scary. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to use it. And so finding a way to not let that take over, I think, is really important.
Yeah. And also, everyone uses social media differently. This is the thing, right? You know, and like I get stupid criticism from people because I don't just post my art. I'll also post pictures of my cat, and also, you know, videos of me doing weightlifting. And occasionally people criticize me. It's like, can you just post just art, or can you just post like cats instead? And I'm like, look, this is me. This is what I do. If you don't like it, just unfollow me. Like,
I love seeing the weightlifting myself. Personally, I'm all over the weightlifting. I'm like, yeah, go Sarah.
And I'm just like, I'm a real person, and I'm like, I like being a real person online. I mean, you know, that may have to change and shift, and, you know, I may decide to go offline, or who knows, but right now I'm just like, you know, I'm trying to advocate for being an actual real person, you know, just trying to resist the whole like brand yourself, have a managed brand, mainly because to me that makes it not very fun.
Yeah.
So I don't want to do it.
So there's a bunch of questions about becoming a professional graphic recorder, which I'm going to actually you have a mini course, which I'm going to put into chat here, if I can get it to transfer from one place to the other. Lou, can you put that in there? And that, I think, would, you know, hopefully answer those beginning sort of getting your feet wet questions. But then I wanted one more question, which is, there are several questions here about being multi-passionate, which is kind of where we started everything. So try to form this into something, you know, formed. I mean, for me, I feel like I'm 100% an advocate of picking a thing and pursuing that one thing. But what I'm trying to say, I guess, when I was asking this question earlier, is like, that doesn't mean you can't incorporate different threads of your history and different media and whatever into that one thing, right? Yeah. But that pursuing one thing and having a clarity about that, I think, is super, super helpful. But so, you know, one person asks, how can we best represent a multi-passionate quote unquote career on like a resume? Somebody else is asking, let's see, how can we avoid running the risk of crossing the line between professionals and hobbyists? Like, keep it, you know, be professional, like be a professional something, you know? And then there was another one here as well. Yeah, something along those lines. Anyway, the point being, you've got these, you know, messy history, like you've got a messy history, like you have a history of doing lots of different things. So how do you stand up and say like, no, this is what I'm doing right now, and all these things mean I do it better, instead of they mean I can't do it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes. I'm going to come back to this thing I said at the beginning of the course, which is that like identity is utility. And what I mean by that is, you don't have to show all your cards. You don't have to tell everyone everything that you do, because in my experience, particularly in the professional realm, people want to know, are you this? And so I will try to talk to someone's context of something that they understand and something that they can see the value of. And again, the value piece is like, if you can demonstrate the value of a thing that you do, people get that, even if they don't quite understand. Like graphic recording, a lot of people don't understand what it is and how it works. So you just have to build trust with clients and then be like, and just do it and actually prove and demonstrate the value of it. With representing yourself on a CV, again, CVs are a functional tool. Who are you writing a CV for? What job are you applying for? You don't need to list everything. You know, you write a selected biography, a selected CV, and so you tailor it appropriately. So for example, like at the moment, because of the kind of work that I'm doing, I don't mention that I'm a sculptor. Like that's irrelevant in the context that I'm working in. And then when people find out that, I did that for, 8 years, they're like, oh, what? And I've also worked as an animator for Comedy Central, and I don't mention that because it's not relevant right now, but it doesn't mean that I don't have those skills and I didn't do that, and I might bring that card out again and talk about it if I'm trying to get more animation work.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at, is like, focus on one thing. You know what you're doing right now. You narrow in based on what your goals are for now, and take all these, take whatever you need out of your history and out of what's been going on. Yes, 100%.
And also prioritizing, it's like, even if you have like 10 things that you love doing, there will be priorities at certain times. So for example, if you are really wanting to earn more money, you might prioritize the thing that, makes more money, and work with that for 5 years. And then once that sort of thing is done, you might shift back into other stuff. Like, hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Totally makes sense. No, I think that's right. It's like looking at all of these things as your tool bag. Like, this is your history. This is what you get to draw on. This is what is going to make sense. And then you can just use it, as you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it makes a ton of sense. All right. So I think we should wrap things up here. It's dawn where you are. So, start your day. And I just really enjoyed this so much. Again, apologies for the tech fail, but you are a champ for being able to like just kind of make that work. Thanks for everybody being here today. We do have, there's a bunch of links in the chat here. And when we do eventually run this as an RSS podcast, there'll be show notes, and we'll have all those links in the show notes as well. We have another episode coming up next week with Julia Dewitt, who was the intern in Out on the Wire. She was the person who was learning at Stamp Judgment when I was there. And she was just an amazing person then. And then since then, she was like, oh, she's everywhere. She was a senior producer. And then she was at This American Life and all these other places. And I got in touch with her to do an interview. And she's like, well, I don't know if you want to, because I just spent a year at a Zen Buddhist monastery and I'm going into grad school for social work. And I was like, oh, I want to know everything. Like, what happened? And why are you doing this? And it's like, because I think everybody has dreamed of just kind of stepping away. And like, maybe that's what she's doing. Maybe it's not what she's doing. I don't really know. I don't know the answer. So I'm excited about that.
It sounds really interesting.
Yeah. So I'm interested in that. And I think it's going to be an interesting contrast here too, because like she's had that go-go life and now taking a totally different direction, which is a kind of experimentation too, kind of like we're talking about this week.
So to riff off that, someone said to me once that like in a life you live many lives, and I really like that. It's like you might be, working in radio for 10 years, and then you might spend 10 years being a monk.
Right. Yeah.
Why not?
She's going into social work. So like that, I feel like that's about conversations and empathy and all the things that narrative audio is about. So, it'll be interesting to see what those connections are for her as well. But so I'm looking forward to that. And if you want to check that out, if you go to if you're here in Crowdcast right now, there's a button right above here with my name on it. If you click that, you go to our channel and you can see our other upcoming episodes. We have 2 more episodes currently scheduled, one with her and one with Austin Kleon in a few weeks. So go ahead and sign up for those and you'll get all the notifications. And thank you so much for being here. Everybody who's been here live. Thank you, Sarah. It's been a pleasure. And
thank you so
I don't know,
much.
take a nap, maybe.
Coffee and get to work.
No, just start. You can be like, you're such an early bird getting the worm today.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks everyone for joining us and for your great questions. And I hope that wish you all the best with your creative work and lives. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.